Here comes Jimmer. Long ball.
All right, hello everyone. Happy Selection Sunday and welcome back to Basketball in the Mountains, the second episode of the day. If anyone missed, I did an episode, emergency-ish episode earlier this morning, recapping CSU winning the Mountain West tournament. Obviously, just only talked about that game because this was earlier this morning, so didn't know the seeding, where the Rams were seated and who the opponent would be. I just got back from Fort Collins where I was covering their Selection Sunday show. So that's what we're going to be doing today on this podcast. We've got a lot to cover, where the Rams are going, where I'm going to follow to cover them. The rest of the teams in the Mountain Time Zone. I think we've got 5 other teams, not including the Rams, that are in the tournament. A lot of interesting matchups. Then we've got 7 teams, other teams to talk about that are coming to Denver, because one of them is a Mountain Time Zone team that we'll talk a lot about on this podcast. And then we'll hit some general takeaways on the bracket at the end of the show. And because this is a wide-ranging episode talking about a lot of teams and just kind of getting ready for what expects to be an awesome NCAA tournament. Like, it just really feels like we're in one for the ages. There's nobody else I would rather have on. This is somebody that I've probably talked about basketball with the most for the better part of a decade now. And that is my good friend, Caleb Wilfinger, who is a deputy editor at Pickswise. He is one of the smartest sports gambling people I know, and you can follow him at Caleb_Wilfinger on Twitter to follow all of his coverage and make some money, because he knows exactly what he's doing there. Caleb, I appreciate you coming on the show for this gigantic episode we've got here.
Yeah, no, and thank you very much for that that lavish intro. That was much appreciated. No, I really appreciate it. And Tyler's exactly right. We've talked so much basketball, especially college. We've spent our time doing a lot of Penn State basketball coverage, and this is, I'm sure, for both of us, one of our favorite days of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I mentioned. I said that exact same thing on the episode earlier this morning, that Selection Sunday is always one of the days on the calendar I look forward to the most. I said the Thursday and Friday to start the NCAA tournament is probably my 2 favorite days back to back on the NCAA or on the sports calendar. And yeah, as Caleb mentioned, we went to Penn State together, met in 2016, immediately, became good friends talking hoops. It's just been a budding friendship. We talk hoops all the time, and Caleb is way more dialed into the national scene than I am with how much hoops he watch. I really focus a lot on the teams here that I cover, and obviously the teams in the Mountain Time Zone that we talk about on this podcast. But he's really dialed into everything, so he'll give some great insight on especially the teams that we'll have coming to Denver, because there's some really good and fun matchups that'll be here this weekend at Ball Arena. But I wanted to kind of set the scene. I was in Fort Collins this afternoon, like I mentioned, with CSU. A lot less nerves this time around for CSU after last year. They really felt like they were pretty safely in, but ended up being one of the last. I think they ended up being the last team in when the seedings all came out, if I remember correctly. Even Colorado was like 2 spots ahead of them. They ended up being the last team getting in, which was a little bit of a shock with how good of a season they had, and they ended up going to Dayton and beating Virginia in the first round. But obviously, winning the Mountain West Tournament Championship on Saturday night secured their spot and secured their spot not in Dayton, which I know they were happy about not having that. They said they were not happy about not having that quick turnaround like they did last year. And they were just kind of anxiously waiting to see where they would go. We had to wait through a couple commercials. They didn't get to. They were in the West region, so they didn't get to one of the last teams revealed. But it is official. CSU will be playing Memphis. CSU is number 12 seed. They're playing number 5 seed Memphis in Seattle at noon Mountain Time on Friday afternoon, 11 a.m. local time tip off. Caleb, what's your early thoughts on this matchup for CSU? Obviously, this is a team that's been playing one of the hottest teams in the country, winning 10 straight, just kind of rolling since 2025 started. So, and what have you liked most about watching CSU, and kind of how much are you looking forward to this matchup on Friday?
Yeah, CSU, I mean, what a great story. For a little bit of inside baseball, but we spoke, back in December about CSU and some of their struggles that they were having in non-conference and things of that nature. And I think you and I both were unsure of how where the season was going to go. And full credit to Nico Medved. It's an incredible coaching job. Really one of the more underrated jobs I think in the country this season for a team that has an interesting mix of young and old, but mostly sort of on the younger side. And what they've been able to accomplish over the last like month and a half. If you look right now, if you go to Bartorvik, which is a prominent, I know you're familiar with, but it's a
Yeah.
prominent predictive analytics site for college basketball. Very useful. I recommend everybody go check it out. You can sort and just basically get into the nitty gritty of how teams have performed over a certain period of time. In the case of CSU, if you go back to, I believe, February 15th, so essentially 1 month ago from now, from today,
Yeah,
they
that was the when they beat Wyoming. That was the start of this 10-game winning
yes,
streak. Yeah.
yes, they're a top 10 team in the country. Up there with all the elite of the elite for the most part. They're playing. Not only are they winning, they are boat racing teams. I mean, for lack of a better term, I mean they are really. Their offense is very free flowing.
Mhm.
That's one of the reasons why I like. It's obviously a great joy watching Nate Clifford play. He leaps off the screen when he plays. In my opinion, he's a top 10 player in the country. At least he's certainly playing like it at the moment. And all the pieces have kind of seemed to coalesce around. The guards are playing very well. They get great bench production. You look at the Boise game last night or Saturday, the 15th, that championship game, and they get down early. They look like they have tired legs. Third game in 3 days, short turnaround, and the bench comes in and gives them a real jump start. Excuse me. And from there on, it was kind of like for the most part smooth sailing. So I think it's very impressive up and down the roster. You look at what CSU's been able to accomplish, and I think some of that does come stemming from the struggles they had early, overcoming that, coming into their own, finding a groove. And credit to Nico Medved, he has talked in interviews not about the tournament, not as the winning streak kept going on,
Mhm.
not about where you got, are we in, are we out? We deserve more respect. We're still all these bracketologists don't have us in the field despite we're winning all these games. The next game, win the next game, win the next game, win the next game. Focus. And for the most part, the team has really not lost their focus over the past month plus. They are a very dangerous team heading into March, and I don't think they're necessarily going to be as popular of a pick as some other teams in their general seed line, just because they're not as like it's not an exact term, but like mid-majory. The
Mhm.
Mountain West is kind of a gray area of a conference, and
I mean, it's
the
4 straight years with 4 bids, 4 or more
right.
bids.
It's
It's 6, but they've had 4 again this
people
year.
are used to seeing those teams in the field,
Mhm.
and so
Yeah.
I actually think even though CSU is a 12 seed and there are teams higher seeded than them, they're certainly, to me, as presently constituted, like you said, since the new year, I don't think there's been a better team in the conference overall. So, and I have to give the coaching staff and the players, of course, like a lot of credit for that. And so, this is a well-rounded team and a dangerous one heading into the tournament.
Yeah, and with Boise State not making it, which we can talk about that at the end with some of the snubs, but it was very clear that the Mountain West title game was an elimination game in terms of the NCAA tournament. That you had to win that game. You weren't getting in without it, because CSU and Boise were in very similar spots in the bubble, and Boise obviously ends up on the wrong side of it after CSU gets the automatic bid from the conference. But yeah, like you said, it's going to be an interesting matchup for CSU. It's two of the best mid-major teams in the country playing this week. I mean, you can say if you think Memphis is a mid-major or not, whatever. There's all that kind of debate. But Memphis has been one of the best teams in the country outside of the Power 4 conferences all season. They won the AAC today, beat UAB. They're 29-5. They've got an All-American candidate in PJ Haggerty, who's a guy who's just a really, really good scorer. Obviously, Penny Hardaway is still their coach, so there's some star power in that regard. What should people know about Memphis aside from the obvious? Like what has impressed you about them, and kind of how do they stack up in matchup wise against the Rams?
Memphis is probably, and as someone who has been plugged in a lot with a lot of different conferences for most of this season, Memphis is a very tough nut to crack of a basketball team. They are very talented. I think that's undeniable. PJ Haggerty, you referenced him. I mean, he is a walking bucket. Can get you
They've got a
40.
couple former high major guys,
Yeah,
like
I
Tyrese
mean,
Hunter's on the team as well. Yeah,
100%. And his status, it will be critical for that game. You know, for those that
absolutely.
don't know, he's fighting through an injury suffered in the semifinal against Tulane, so of the American tournament. So we're not sure if he's going to play. Signs point to game time decision, but again, we'll get there. Dane Danger inside, also a
Yep.
very good player. They
Illinois
have,
guy. He was at Illinois. Yeah.
yep, yeah, no, they have, as you say, like high major caliber talent. Penny, to his credit, I think has been a underwhelming regular season but good postseason coach. So which is a fair position to be in when you're at Memphis, where the overwhelming favorite to win your conference every year, and so you kind of
Yet to make it to
Memphis.
the Sweet 16, but yeah, they've had success getting to the NCAA tournament very consistently under
Right, and
Penny.
they went around. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, even you look at a couple years ago, they had that second round game against Gonzaga, which is one of my favorite
Yes.
games in recent memory in the tournament. Awesome game. So like
Yeah, in 2022. Yeah.
they've come up against some tough draws. I will give him, you know, that where it's like maybe if they had a better draw. Unfortunately, for if you're a Memphis fan, I think this is also a tough draw because you're playing a
Yes.
team that's red hot, and I don't. Memphis has more talent than CSU, but I don't think it is drastic because CSU has the high end capability of a Nick Clifford, where Haggerty isn't by far the best player on the floor. That's just not the case at all. And I think Memphis, the stylistic challenge for Colorado State in this game is, can you score inside on Memphis? That's the big thing because Colorado State, I mean, one, they're shooting the three ball better than any team in the country over the last like month and a half.
It's not a
It's
coincidence they're shooting the ball really well during this win streak.
It's
Yeah.
very strict. I mean, they're like 43, 44%. It's unbelievable what they're shooting. So is that unsustainable? Potentially. I always, you know, as someone that bets on these games, I look for, you know, trends that might be unsustainable, regression to the mean. The regression has not come yet for Colorado State. And I will say part of their offense is they get a lot of open looks. They generate a lot of good looks. It's unselfish. It's good basketball. Look at last night against Boise. A lot of those threes they were taking. Some of them were heat check, like they were feeling it and they went in, but a lot of them were swing the ball, get an open look, and that's a good Boise defense.
Yeah.
So Memphis has its own challenge on its hands in defending the perimeter. CSU's challenge is going to be, can we be enough of a threat in the paint to keep Memphis honest on defense?
Yeah, and I really haven't watched Memphis a ton this year. I watched them very early in the season because they were in Maui along with Colorado, so there was a chance they could have played. They beat UConn, they beat Michigan State, then they ended up losing to Auburn in the championship game in Maui. That was kind of a surprise for them. They also beat Clemson and Ole Miss during the season. Like Memphis has a lot of really, really good wins. But I think the matchup is just going to come down to Nick Clifford versus PJ Haggerty. Like I think they're both going to be able to get their points. But I do think Clifford obviously still has the defense on his side as well. Like he's just clearly a better defender, and that's why he's a more highly regarded NBA prospect than Haggerty. And I think that could be the difference, is where if Nick is able to get his points and limit Haggerty a little bit as well, they're going to throw a bunch of bodies at him. It's going to be Jalen Lake. You know, Ethan Morton's going to get some shots too, alongside Nick. They're going to throw everything they've got at a guy like Haggerty because, like you said, he is a walking bucket. And it just feels like if he's able to get to his spots and he's comfortable, he's a tough guy to stop. I mean, he just put up, I think it was in the quarterfinals of the tournament the other day, he put 42 against Wichita State in a close game, but they needed every one of those
Yeah,
buckets.
they
So
had to have it. Yeah.
yeah.
Which
Yeah,
is another thing about Memphis that, and I'm sorry to cut you off. That's
Oh,
another
you're
thing
good.
about Memphis, though. The narrative around Memphis over the last 2 months has been, if you're someone like me who keeps track of these things, Memphis is consistently a big favorite in terms of the betting lines over a lot of the teams in the American, and rightfully so because their predictive metrics are very good and etc. That's how these lines are derived. But they consistently win and don't cover numbers. They win a lot of close games, which means there is
A
a
lot of high
skill.
scoring games too. Yeah.
100%, and on defense they foul a lot, which is what you noticed if you might have watched the American
Yeah.
this week. Memphis gets to the line a good amount, but they also foul a lot. We just saw Colorado State go through a Mountain West tournament where they got to the line a lot, and to their credit, they made a really good amount of their free throws, which was especially important in the Utah State game and things like that when Utah State made that furious comeback. So I do think that Colorado State should be able to take advantage of some of these defensive lapses Memphis has, even though they have like raw talent and good shot blocking and things like that. They should be able to get to the line if the offense isn't consistently flowing in a certain point in the game. The biggest thing for CSU is outside of just the Stars usually decide a game in March, like we all
Mhm.
kind of know that. Like you said, that one-on-one matchup of top scorer against top scorer, can you avoid making the mistakes, the turnovers? Medved in particular, sometimes they make some turnovers. You cut to the sideline, and he's just like quietly furious. He's not like outwardly emotion, but
He's a stomp and like turn guy is what he
yeah, like
does.
he turns to his assistants. I can't believe that we did that sort of thing. Um, and Memphis, they make mistakes. Like it's not atypical of a Penny Hardaway team. They play kind of free flowing. They might take some ill advised shots. They make mistakes. So it's about, can you be the smarter team in situationally? Because this is going to be a pretty close game, in my opinion. It's just about like what a few little things will decide it down the stretch.
It's definitely one of the more exciting matchups, I think, of opening weekend. But I'll do a more deep dive on watching the film this week, getting leading up to the game, and I'll do a deeper preview. So let's, we got a lot of stuff to get to today. So let's move to the rest of the teams that we cover on this podcast, the Mountain Time Zone. The highest seed is Arizona, who obviously will also be in Seattle, where I'll be. They play number 13 seed Akron, and the winner of that game will get Oregon or Liberty. Just quickly, Caleb, what do you thought about Arizona recently and kind of their draw this first weekend?
Yeah, Arizona's a team that I was a little apprehensive about. They had a really terrible non-conference portion of
Yeah,
there. They started 4-5, if you can believe that, for a program like Arizona. They have largely been playing very well since January, and they've kind of made me a believer. I like their roster construction. I like the fact that their big Vasar, who had to come in and play a lot of minutes due to an injury for their starter,
yeah.
he's played
Krivas
very,
is out for
very
the year. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
big deal.
he's played very well down the stretch. So, and I think Arizona, to sum it up, I think they have a pretty good path. Their game against Akron has a super high total, I think the highest on the board. That's a very fast-paced game. Akron's a good team, don't get me wrong. Like,
Yeah,
they're a team that I was actually hoping would play one of the weaker, like a Purdue, somebody else on the four line. But so that'll be a fun game. I do think Arizona's just, their talent will overwhelm them over time. And Tommy Lloyd, they've had some struggles in the tournament in years past.
for
I
sure.
do kind of like their draw, though. I mean, a little old school Pac-10, Pac-12 game with
Hmm.
Oregon potentially in Seattle. That would be a lot of fun from a crowd perspective. But I do think that they would have the edge in that matchup as well. And if they were to play Liberty, I would also feel that the Liberty's a good team for sure. Won a lot of games here, good offense. But I think Arizona, just from a talent perspective, and their defense and rebounding have been, they've had their toughness tested in some of these recent Big 12 games, and I think they've risen to the occasion enough that I think they're a Sweet 16 caliber team.
Yeah, for sure. I fully agree with that. Even though I have made it clear, this, I am not the biggest Caleb Love fan.
Yes,
I
yeah,
have not been
yeah.
for a long time. I really liked the Arizona team more last year, just because I liked how well rounded they were. That starting five was really good. I had them going pretty far. Got burned by that. The next highest seed is in the Mountain Time Zone. We got is BYU, which we'll skip them for now because they are coming to Denver. So, and they're the headliner for me of the teams coming to Denver. So we'll move on and talk about that game a little bit later. We'll move on to New Mexico, who regular season Mountain West champions, 17-3 in the Mountain West, just have had a really, really good season, but they get a 10 seed. And they have, I think, the most interesting first round matchup against Marquette, the 7 seed. A team that I saw in person last season, a much more loaded and different Marquette team with Tyler Kolek and Oso Ighodaro still being there. But I mean, this is the Cam Jones show now from Marquette. He's been playing like an All-American all season in a more on-ball role. They've still got, PA native Stevie Mitchell, Reading's own. He's still there, and David Joplin. They've got a lot of talent, and this will be a really fascinating matchup against New Mexico. A lot of star power with Donovan Dent and Nelly Jr. Joseph for the Lobos. What sticks out to you about this one?
The guard play for sure. I think it's an easy one, but it leaps off the screen. I mean, Cam Jones and Donovan Dent. This is like who's gonna take the heat check, not like a 30-footer, like a hesitation, step back, mid range.
Oh yeah, these guys live in the mid range.
It's that type of like Cam Jones going to his left. Like there might not be a better player in the country at going to his left than Cam Jones. I mean, he is so smooth. Marquette is a team that I haven't really been a big fan of, just because they have you watch them a lot and they've been pretty underwhelming since the turn of the calendar year. They did show me a little something at the Garden last week in their comeback against Xavier. I thought that their offense was humming and Jones is playing great job and played well. It's kind of an easy thing to say, like when they make outside shots, but they're a team that can be very inconsistent from the outside. And I think New Mexico has a clear path to victory in this one. I don't think that they are, they're not the favorite, and I don't think they should be. But when you have a guy like Dent and a coach like Pitino, and they've been there before, I think New Mexico can learn from their experience last year where they were hot. They went in and Clemson just really dominated that game. And that Clemson team turned out to be, hey, that's a pretty darn good team. So I think that they are in a better position this time around to kind of reset, learn from it. You're in a pretty advantageous travel situation, I think. Mm-hmm. And Marquette is beatable. They don't have a great defense. I think this is going to be a very back and forth game, and it might be up to Dent or Jones to make that key play in the waning minutes.
Yeah, and the 2 seed in that little quad right there is Michigan State, which certainly is not. Michigan State's been playing really, really well lately. Have been benefited by other teams not playing well against them, for sure. But I do think if New Mexico is able to get past Marquette, like there is a path to the Sweet 16 for them, and they were a popular Sweet 16 pick last year. I really like that team. I've said for a while how much of a fan I am of Donovan Dent. I thought he was their best player last year, and obviously Mountain West Player of the Year this year, and just has really taken another step. I really do think there's a chance that New Mexico could get to the second weekend this season as a 10 seed. Like I think there's a bunch of 10 seeds that could be really dangerous, and one of the other ones is Utah State. I feel like. Who will transition to them. They're also, like I said, 10 seed. They narrowly missed Dayton, apparently. I saw on the selection show that, or one of the shows after that, someone on the committee said that if UAB had beaten Memphis today in the AAC title game, Memphis obviously still makes it, but then Utah State would have been bumped to Dayton and playing in the first 4 there. So they narrowly missed that. They will play UCLA in the 7-10 game. That's a fascinating matchup. I'm not very high on this UCLA team. Haven't been all season. And then winner likely gets Tennessee. So Caleb, what have you liked about Utah State? Obviously they had a ridiculous start to the season, cooled off a little bit towards the end of Mountain West play. Obviously getting blown out by CSU in Fort Collins, and then falling down really big in the semifinal tournament game. Just kind of the Aggies. What kind of sticks out to you about watching them?
Well, they're a very well coached team. I think that is definitely apparent. That's a program that really, it seems like, has found a great rhythm. So I do want to give a lot of credit to that program because I mean it's a great place to play at, from a home atmosphere, and they had another really good season. I mean nobody beats them in that place for the most part.
Well, absolutely.
We'll talk about a team that did later, but they they are just a very clean, efficient offense. They have bench guys that can score, starters that can fill it up as well. I think they're a very fun team to watch. They don't play like super slow.
It's a lot of fun, yeah.
It's a lot of fun. It makes them a contrast with UCLA. UCLA is a team that you talked about. I don't think either one of us is very high on kind of like a old school Mick Cronin Cincinnati
Oh
team
yeah.
without like the super high end defense. Like
Mhm.
they're a good defense. Don't get me wrong, and Mick will have them playing hard, in March. But
He really
it's
embraced the Big Ten of it all in this season.
yes. They play slow. They're an inefficient offense.
Hmm.
So they kind of need to play a bad defense to be successful. Now, I do have concerns about Utah State's defense recently,
Hmm.
which we've seen. But again, some of that might just be because Colorado State was just white hot.
Yeah.
So I don't think Utah State has played great defense down the stretch, but they have run into a couple of teams that just shot the absolute lights out. Utah State is a team that was nip and tuck with New Mexico, in their meetings with them this season. They have a win over Colorado State earlier in the year. They have wins over multiple quality teams in the Mountain West. So they're an interesting case study of. I don't think they're as good as last year's team that had Osibor just because of the ceiling of that team. But I do think that their floor offensively is weirdly higher. So I think that they could give UCLA some issues if the Bruins are going to not shoot well from the outside again, like they've been doing a lot down the stretch. They kind of had UCLA also has a lot had problems away from home, away from California, could show up again in a neutral site game where we don't exactly know what the crowd support is going to look like. So I think this is going to be another one. I feel like a broken record, but this is going to be down to the wire. I think, and I think that the odds on this game, the number on this game would reflect that as well.
Yep. Last team we got to cover in the Mountain Time Zone. Well, we'll get to BYU as well, but Grand Canyon is a 13 seed after winning the WAC again. That was a fun game against Utah Valley on Saturday night. Both those teams I felt like would have been fun to see in
Yeah,
the
a lot of
tournament.
points, a lot of points. Good
Yeah.
season for Utah Valley. Really good season.
Yeah, they're a team that I saw in the NIT a couple years ago when they played at Colorado and they beat them. Actually, that was when I think Utah Valley made the Final Four of the NIT that year. They had a
Is
really,
that when they had AMAC?
yeah,
Yeah.
it
They're
was.
good.
Yeah,
They're a good
that was
program.
right before he left before to go to Cal. Yeah.
Right. No, they're a good program. Definitely respect the program. They gave Grand Canyon a good fight last night.
Yep, and yeah, Grand Canyon now is a 13 seed. I think they've made it 3 years in a row now. I saw them in Denver in person actually 2 years ago. That's when they had Chance McMillian, who is obviously a really really good player at Texas Tech, one of the key guys now. We'll see if he gets healthy for their run. But he was there, and I forget who they played, but they ended up losing the first round, but it was a good game. Obviously Bryce Drew is a really good coach, but they have a pretty tough draw. I feel like against Maryland, just with Maryland's a tough team for a mid major with the size they have. I've been a huge fan of Derek Queen the last couple months. He's a guy I'll probably have pretty high on the big board when it comes time to do my NBA draft deep dives. But this kind of what do you think about this Maryland Grand Canyon game? And
This
obviously the
is
winner of this game gets CSU or Memphis. So
yeah. No,
this is
it's
right on the other side there. It'll be in Seattle. Yeah.
this is a fast and this whole pod, the 5, 12, 4, 13 is really fascinating because Grand Canyon is a weird team to evaluate again because you look at they've had injuries throughout the season. And I also think that maybe, they came into the season with very high expectations coming off of last year, winning a game in the tournament, taking Alabama to the wire. You could argue they should have won that game. They came in borderline top 25 AP start the year. Like they were very hyped. And they kind of were like they operated in fits and starts this year. I will give them credit. Tylen Grant Foster comes back from injury, which he had been nursing for a while, apparently.
Yeah.
And they kind of just ran through the conference tournament. They kind of were like, okay, we're going to flip the switch, which, respect for being able to do that. You kind of pulled the rug out after having a kind of like middling season in the WAC, losing a couple games they probably shouldn't have. This team, though, they have high major talent. I mean, the power forward I believe is how you pronounce his name. I might be butchering that. He hit some huge shots in the Alabama game and in the St. Mary's games last year in the tournament, and he had a really good tournament final. He's a guy that can stretch Maryland potentially, bring Queen out a little away from the basket. The thing that I think will eventually prevail for Maryland in this game is their guard play. Their guard play is just very solid, and their 1 through 5 is extremely consistent across the board. Maryland's issue, maybe against the CSU, maybe whoever they play in the next game, could be depth. short turnaround. They don't really have a bench, in my opinion, that's reliable. So their starters are going to have to log a lot of minutes. If you can get them in foul trouble, that could be a thing. Grand Canyon attacks the basket a lot. Maybe they get Maryland in some foul trouble. I actually think Grand Canyon can keep this one in the like 6 to 10 point range. But I think Maryland probably wins by around 7 or so, like 6 or 7. A close game. Grand Canyon will make some shots. They play good defense. I think they're a top 60 defense in Ken Palm of adjusted efficiency. So they play consistently good defense. They have talent to win a game, as we saw last year. But I think Maryland wins a close one.
All right, we'll move to the 8 teams that are coming to Denver. I mentioned BYU is obviously the headliner of that. There's going to be a lot of Cougar fans coming to Denver for this game. It's a tough draw for the Cougars, though, as they will have to play VCU in the first round. Just like I said, just a really, really tough draw for BYU. A team that I like a lot, has been playing really, really well. I've actually been a fan of this BYU team like most of the season. I was really coming into the year. I was looking forward to watching Igor Demin. He was just an intriguing prospect for me. Has not really lived up to it this season. I don't think that says a ton about his future prospects. He's just kind of struggled a little bit in the college game, but they've gotten great production from a guy like Richie Saunders, who was a first team All Big 12 Player of the Year candidate with how we kind of closed the season for sure. Kevin Young has done a great job there in his first year as the coach, just kind of turning it into like an NBA factory a little bit. Obviously, they have number 1 player in the country, AJ DeBanza, coming in next year, which I've talked about on this podcast. BYU is set up really well for the future, but just with the way they had been playing going into the Big 12 tournament, it felt like they were going to be a dangerous team coming into March, and I still feel like they could be if they get past VCU here in this tough first round game. Caleb, what do you like about BYU? Just kind of what sticks out to you, and how far of a run do you feel like they could go on here?
Yeah, I think you and I both feel pretty similarly about BYU as a team. I was hoping for a little more in non-conference and early in
For
Big
sure.
12
Yeah.
and early in Big 12 play. I thought they had some real opportunities and squandered them, like in
Yeah, they
January.
couldn't win a road game in January. That's for
No,
until
and they had
they came to Boulder and beat the Buffs, but everybody was doing that at that point.
that is definitely true. Except UCF, Colorado got that one.
Hey, Baylor couldn't beat them
Um,
either. There you go.
that's true. That's true. Colorado played pretty well down the stretch.
Yeah, not bad.
Um, BYU is a really interesting team because they shoot it very well. They're very prolific, so they have the
They do take a
capability.
lot of threes.
They
Yeah,
have the capability to shoot poorly, which is scary in a tournament setting, but they do generally shoot at a high percentage. But they have gotten one thing that I think has been underrated in recent weeks with their coinciding with their rise is the play of their bigs has been way more consistent. They're staying on the court more, and they're involved in the offense, but they're also involved on defense. I mean, epitome of this is the double overtime game against Iowa State the other week
the
in
one in
recent
Ames in the
the
regular
one in
season.
Ames.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
sorry
great
about that.
game.
They commit a turnover, one of many they commit in that game, and Iowa State is going in for a layup. And Keita, the big man, comes back and he blocks the ball off the backboard, and BYU gets the ball. They save the possession, and they end up winning the game. And that was a huge reason for that. They're not a team that has been known for that kind of defense or physicality in recent years. They're a spread you out, shoot, score a lot of points, outscore you. If they just have a little bit more of that to their game, I think their caliber is easily that of a Sweet 16 team. Again, though, you mentioned the problem is the draw. This is a very physical VCU team, high pressure, and we've seen BYU's guards struggle at points in Big 12 play. Houston,
Really
for example,
experienced VCU team.
really very old team of fifth-year players. And you look at guys that have been in the tournament before, and BYU has struggled with pressure and aggressive defenses. Houston and Iowa State in the comeback, most notably. But even earlier in the year as well, they had some struggles. So this is a tough matchup stylistically. I do think BYU probably has the crowd, which is matters
Yeah, of course.
in a neutral site game. It's gonna be this is I think one of the best games of the entire first round because it's a stylistic contrast. Styles make fights, as they say. So what will win out in a game like this? Will it be the slow pace, plotting, a lot of fouls? VCU getting BYU out of their tempo and rhythm, or will BYU say you have to score with us? Because then, if that's the case, and VCU plays from behind, I think BYU wins the game.
Yeah, VCU will be at least Ryan Odom will be familiar with the altitude from his Utah State days. Their leading scorer, Max Shulga, as well, was a former Utah State player. So he'll be familiar with that. Like, I do think, I mean, like I said, this is a very veteran VCU team. They'll certainly be ready for this game. But I do agree with you. Like, if BYU can get past VCU, which is going to be easier said than done, I do think there is a path for them to get to the Sweet 16, because on the other side of that little pod is Wisconsin and Montana, and that Wisconsin's going to have a lot of fans here. That's for sure. I know that. Anybody who knows anything about Denver is there are a lot of Midwest transplants here. Chicago might as well be the hub for Big Ten alums, but Denver is a close second, especially for the Nebraska alums, the Wisconsin alums, Illinois, all that kind of stuff. Minnesota alums, everybody. So there's going to be a lot of Badger fans here for sure. They obviously travel well regardless. But Montana's a little bit of a tough draw, I feel like, for the Badgers. Despite
they can score.
They're going to be heavy favorites. I watched that Big Sky championship game the other day because Northern Colorado was in there. The Bears were trying to get to their first tournament since 2011, so dialed into that one. But Montana, ended up coming out on top. And this is, you saw today in the Big Ten title game how much of a slog that was for Wisconsin. Just really seemed gassed, at that point. Playing 4 games in 4 days, ends up losing to Michigan in a close game. Just couldn't make shots. It is what it is. But now they have another quick-ish turnaround. Like, these are Thursday, Saturday games in Denver. So what do you think about this matchup? This could be, do you feel like one of the higher seeded – Montana could be the highest seed to pull off an upset, or lowest seed, or whatever you want to call it. They could be one of the higher seeds that pulls off an upset here.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of lower, I guess the higher or lower seeds, however you want to classify them, that have a real shot. Montana is one of them. They're obviously they're a big underdog in the game. Wisconsin, a team that profiles very well in terms of like their predictive metrics, their analytics. They're probably best of any team in the Big Ten, right up there with Michigan State. And for good reason. I mean, their offense is excellent. When it's humming, it's a great thing to watch. John Tonji, former CSU Ram. I mean, he's been,
there'll be plenty of people there coming. He's from Omaha too, so this is kind of a little bit of a home cooking game for him.
I mean, he's you talk about a great development story. I mean, he's probably one of the better ones in the country. He has the capability, especially against an inferior opponent, to really go off. I would be very interested though in a Wisconsin, against whoever they're playing in the second round, whether that be a BYU or a VCU, because, and especially if it's a BYU, you talk about tempo, threes, free-flowing offense. I mean, that could be, first one to 85, 90, even in a tournament game where the pace is usually slower and teams miss more shots.
Hey, I saw a 102 to 100 game last year in person, man. I'm not expecting anything.
You might get something around that if those two teams play, because they're mirrors of each other. Their big guys can play away from the basket a little, especially Wisconsin. So yeah, no, I'm interested though in Wisconsin, how they're going to have to deal with this travel after 4 games in 4 days. I think you bring up a great point of how are they going to be able to handle in this altitude, and they'll have the crowd, but it'll be very interesting to see if they can make it out of this little pod. It's a fascinating little grouping here.
And we'll get to the other 4 teams now. I think 2 teams particularly that will travel really, really well. We'll start with Texas A&M and Yale. I don't know. Texas A&M hasn't, I think you've been higher on them than I have most of the season. I'm just not much of a Wade Taylor guy, although he could put on a show at Ball Arena, and I would not be surprised if he's the best player or the most exciting player that comes to Denver this weekend. That's for sure. Yale's an interesting team. Just kind of, what do you think about that 4-13 matchup there?
Well, Yale, if people remember, they obviously upset Auburn in the first round of the tournament last year, which is a major upset.
I had Auburn going really far, so I remember.
And a lot of folks did, and this Yale team, they have a lot of continuity from the team. Obviously, no Danny Wolf, but most of the starting lineup still there. Poulikitis, most notably, he made all those threes. guess what? He was doing that again in the conference tournament this past weekend. So Yale's a very veteran team. They're well coached. They're about what you'd expect from the Ivy, a conference that has had plenty of success in the first round in like the last 5 years. The tournament, Princeton beating Arizona a couple years ago. So the Ivy's no stranger to upsets. And you're right about A&M. I mean, I think in a month or two ago I was higher on them than I am now. I think A&M is just kind of like they've been figured out. They're kind of a one-trick pony where it's like they're going to out-rebound you. They're going to win the shot volume battle. But if they can't make any threes, it doesn't matter how many chances they get. They seem like they have a real inability. There's a lid in the basket sometimes for them that is very concerning. But they're an athletic team. They're a good defense. But let's just say I think Yale is pretty live in this game. I think this is a one-possession game in either direction. I think Yale's continuity, ball movement, passing, I think that will make up for some of their deficiencies on the glass. Because at the end of the day, if you make shots, doesn't matter how many rebounds you get.
That is absolutely true. And then the winner of that game gets the winner of Michigan and UC San Diego. Another awesome game. I feel like Michigan, I said, is going to travel really, really well. They always do. There's plenty of Michigan alums here in Denver, but they're playing a team. I think your favorite team in the country when UC San Diego, and certainly
Maybe, yeah.
and certainly one of the teams I have been dialed into all season. The Tritons, just an incredible story. A former D2 program. Recent D2 program making the jump up and just dominating the Big West this season. Them and UC Irvine. I wrote about them a couple weeks ago, maybe last month, just kind of how good the Big West was. And UC San Diego is going to be a popular pick against Michigan. A very unconventional Michigan team. You mentioned Danny Wolf left Yale, is now at Michigan, and is essentially playing point forward for the Wolverines. They're just a really unique team. Kind of what sticks out to you about this game between Michigan and the Tritons?
Well, if it comes down to the last couple possessions, UC San Diego might be in trouble because Michigan all season long, to a little bit of my chagrin, to be honest, has excelled at winning close games in all different types of fashions. Maybe some of them a little more unsustainable than others, but I do have to respect what Dusty May has done. I think he's done a very good job.
Oh yeah.
And they've completely turned around the program from what it was last year, and they're just a kind of a Frankenstein of a team. You mentioned this, like Danny Wolf point forward. They've got Vlad Golden inside. They have
they play 2 7-footers, which is like the nightmare scenario for most mid-majors who just
most mid-majors,
but don't have the size. Yeah.
But the only thing as it relates to this matchup is San Diego. You talk about Irvine. They played Irvine 3 times this year. What does Irvine have? Irvine has an elite rim protector, 7-footer.
Yes.
They also bring a very good defender off the bench, and they're an elite defense team. Irvine's a top 30 defense in the country, and they play like this amoeba style, like funky defense. So UC San Diego just last night, played against them, and the thing that stands out about them compared to a lot of other teams, even of the mid-major variety, they pass very well, they cut very well. They're a very unselfish team.
They're so well coached.
Eric Olin has done the best coaching job in the country this year. I mean, I think he's just a phenomenal coach. Very even-keeled, always with a smile on his face. And his team plays like that. They're an older team. They have an all-defense player in terms of not just the conference, the country, an all-defense player. They have, all-conference guys all over the board. And they're a good shooting team. And not only are they a good shooting team, but they are elite at not turning it over and forcing turnovers. And what does Michigan do? Turn the ball over a lot. So there's a kind of a reason why the line is priced very short. UC San Diego has a lot of respect in the market. They were the best against the spread team in the country this year as well. So that speaks to how well they've exceeded expectations. And Michigan can get a little sloppy with the ball. And UC San Diego, it wouldn't surprise me if Michigan had double-digit turnovers in this game. And that's kind of the recipe for an upset when you're going up against a team that, Michigan has more size and more like skill on paper. But I do think that they're a little unproven in this sort of setting. How are they going to handle this like unique kind of look that I don't think any team has given them all season?
Yeah, they're definitely a team I could see winning this little pod here and going to the Sweet 16.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't think it would be a surprise at all.
They are one of the, and we both reference Ken Palm and Bartor Verclaw, these predictive analytic metrics, which more often than not are are on the right path. They are one of the highest rated mid majors at
They've been
KenPom
consistently top 50 for the last like 6-8 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the highest in recent history in this regard. I mean, going back to teams like that John Morant Murray State team, and
Yeah.
even like 10 years ago, some of those high rated mid majors that everybody kind of knew was going to win a game in the tournament, and then they did. So while UC San Diego, I do think will be a trendy pick this week. I think it's for good reason.
All right, well let's wrap up with some general takeaways from the bracket, just biggest griefs. As you can see, looking at the South region graphic here, Louisville as an 8 seed is just generally ridiculous. I don't really understand that one at all. Pat Kelsey, like I said, the ACC is not good. It's not very good at all, and it probably should have been a 3-bid league because I don't think North Carolina deserved to get in either. But Pat Kelsey's done a hell of a job in his first year with the Cardinals. Completely turned around a Louisville program that won 6 or 7 games last year. I think 6 games. Completely rebuilt it through the transfer portal. One of my guys, Javon Hadley, who was at CU the last 2 years, is the same exact player. Glue guy, does a little bit of everything for Louisville. I thought they were going to be like a 5 or a 6 seed, and now they're an 8 seed, and it's just really surprising.
Yeah, I would have had them pegged for a 6 seed as well. Their metrics certainly speak of them as that, and they put up. I mean, don't be fooled by the final score against Duke last night. I mean, they were winning that game in the second half. Obviously, no flag, but Louisville was playing very well. Justin Edwards had a really good game, and obviously Chucky Hepburn has had an awesome season for them. So their guards are very good. They're built to win in March, and Kelsey is a phenomenal coach. I mean, what he's done. I mean, you said it. I don't even think you sold it high enough. They were a disaster.
Oh yeah, it was really bad. Yeah.
I mean, early in that year, they were losing games as 20-point favorites. I mean, so just an absolute walking disaster. And to change the culture there, and to really reignite that fan base, a great and passionate fan base. Look, I mean, they're an 8 seed, and I think it's just patently a mistake. But you get to play in Lexington. That's not far from home, and I think you have an interesting matchup against Creighton, so I think Louisville, they can win a game, and then you might get a decent crowd against, an Auburn in round 2, which is probably not something that Auburn bargained for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all these number 1 seeds, I said this the other day, the number 1 seeds are just as good as they've ever been. And I don't see any of them losing in the first weekend. It would just be hard to see that. But Louisville as an 8 seed is not a team, like you said, that Auburn really probably expected to see in the second round. And then, like I said, my other big grief was North Carolina getting in. I thought, tying this in, I thought Boise State should have got in. Like I said this morning, I thought they were deserving. I didn't expect them to get in. Like I honestly expected this with kind of how underseeded the Mountain West was last year. Despite getting 6 bids, there was multiple teams. Almost everybody was underseeded if you looked at the metrics last season. Did anybody else stick out to you from getting in or not getting in standpoint?
I was pretty surprised Indiana didn't get in, just in terms of power conference branding. I mean, if you want to stack up their wins, I think they even had better wins than North Carolina. West Virginia, though, was
That's right.
6 quad 1, if my memory serves me correctly, and UNC had 1. And I don't know. I think it's a tough conundrum, because the committee was clearly, if you listen to their comments after, in the interviews after the bracket was revealed, they talked about the Tucker DeVries injury. Former Drake player came over.
He's been out the whole year, though.
That's the whole year, and they beat Kansas and Iowa State without him. That doesn't so their logic.
They saw that loss to Colorado in the Big 12 tournament, though, and they're like, no.
Loss. It's a bad loss. I still thought even with that loss they would be last four in. I thought that they would be like one of the, not the last team in, but like the third to last team in, something like that. Where I never thought they were a danger to miss tournament entirely. If you look at Bracket Matrix, any of the bracketologists, 111 bracketologists in Bracket Matrix, none of them had West Virginia out of the tournament.
Yeah,
that speaks volumes about the committee. They're really going on a limb here, and so we'll see. We'll see if the play of North Carolina justifies it. I think on a positive note for the Mountain West, the San Diego State is in.
Mm-hmm. I thought they would get in on brand name.
And
I thought they'd be in Dayton as well. Yeah.
And it wouldn't shock me if Dutcher, I mean, and company,
It's going to be an
they
ugly
won
game.
that game. And yeah, it's very interesting. You talk about contrast of styles. I mean, that's certainly one of them. So the field as a whole just felt like teams were wildly underseeded or they were put in a corner because they put so many SEC teams in. You look at a team like Gonzaga. I know they lost a bunch of close games in non-conference, but that team's not an 8 seed. Like
No,
that,
that's not it's not a game Houston's looking forward to in the second round.
no, that team is like a 6 seed or a 5 seed. Like that, they're not an
Talent-wise, yeah.
8. They talent-wise, 100%. And coaching, we 9
Oh
straight
yeah,
Sweet
yeah.
16s. You know what you're going to get. So that's a brutal draw for Kelvin Sampson and company. I'm sure they weren't happy. St. Mary's thought was also underseeded a little bit. Some of the SEC teams that were overseeded, Oklahoma, for example,
Ole Miss,
Ole
I
Miss,
thought as a
absolutely,
6. Yeah, I didn't think they were a
definitely.
6.
And so, and I think
Vanderbilt not even getting a bye. That was surprising to me.
again, very inconsistent logic with the committee, but it definitely felt like they had an emphasis on, okay, we really value the SEC this year.
Hmm.
So here's our kind of, and so it's interesting, but I think the biggest takeaway I had from the bracket overall was the West region is incredible. Like there's just so many storylines there. Kansas, Arkansas with St. John's in the bottom of that pool. Talk about Hall of Fame coaches and things like
Oh
that.
yeah,
Drake and Missouri with
Self
the
Calipari just writes it.
eh,
That story writes itself right
right,
there.
100%, especially with how the last couple of seasons have gone for those guys. You look at like Drake and Missouri, the contrast, one of the fastest teams in the country, one of the
I love
slowest
Drake. Yeah.
teams. They're so much fun. So and UConn, defending national champions, 2-time. Hey, how would you like to win? And you get to play Florida, who's right now is a buzzsaw.
The best team in the country right now,
The
probably.
best,
Yeah.
the best team in the country, and my favorite, definitely my favorite team in the country, definitely from a power conference perspective.
Yeah.
So storylines all over the
And then
place.
you've got speaking that West bracket, you've got CSU and Drake and Grand Canyon. All those teams felt like they could be Sweet 16 teams if it breaks
Very
right for them.
high.
Yeah.
There's a very high caliber of mid-major this tournament that I really appreciate. And I think
Yeah.
it speaks to your point earlier at the top of the podcast about, hey, this is one of the strongest tournament fields in years. Like, don't take this one for granted. Like, this has the potential. I don't want to overhype it yet. It's hard to overhype the tournament, but this has the potential to be one of the best tournaments we've had in the last like decade plus. This is should be a sensational tournament, and we might end up with a chalky Final Four, but at the end of the day, I think it's about the journey, not the destination.
There you go.
And as it turns out, that destination at the end might actually be a pretty darn good game. If we get a Duke Florida national championship, I don't think anyone's going to complain about that.
No, it's not certainly from a talent standpoint, and it wouldn't be. I don't think we're going to get San Diego State and FAU in a Final Four game this year, but I do think even if we get 3 1 seeds or 2 1 seeds and 2 2 seeds, I think, like you said, the journey along the way will be really fun and exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, there could be some, don't be surprised. I mean, a team like Colorado State, Sweet 16 is absolutely on the board for them.
Yep, for sure.
UC San Diego, et cetera, down the line. There is real potential for all it takes is one domino to fall one way, as it always does in the tournament. And next thing you know, you're looking at, oh, how did they make the Elite Eight? The fun begins.
All right, Caleb, thanks for coming on and coming on Basketball in the Mountains. I'm sure you will be a regular guest here throughout the NCAA tournament because I'm going to try to do I'm going to do a podcast later in the week, like I said, doing a deep dive on the CSU Memphis game and hopefully do some more in Arizona because I haven't talked about them as much as I would have liked to. Obviously, like I said, they are the highest seed from the Mountain Time Zone. On the 4 line, and they will be in Seattle. So hopefully I'll talk to some people there and get a little bit of better sense and do a deeper dive on their season as well. So you can look forward to that later in the week. And then obviously, depending on what the CSU game looks like on Friday and kind of how all that shakes out over the weekend in Seattle, maybe I'll do an emergency episode recapping the games quickly. But if not, I will certainly be back Monday with a guest. We'll see who comes on to recap the Wild's opening first weekend of the NCAA tournament. Like I said, I'll be in Seattle with the Rams. Look for some great stories. Going to try to do some stuff on Nico Medved. Could be the last ride for him. I did a big profile on Nico last season that ran on Selection Sunday. Which still all that still kind of holds up and leads a little bit of to where he could be headed. I did a deep dive on his Minnesota background, and kind of his ties to that program, which now has the job opening. But also write about Nick Clifford as well, who I think could really emerge as a star during this run here if CSU wins a game or two and is able to make it to the second round, to the second weekend. His NBA stock from all the people I've talked to continues to rise. He's just had such an impressive season, and I'll be documenting all of that. Plenty of great stories on this Rams team as well that I'm looking forward to tell this week with a bigger spotlight on these guys. But yeah, Caleb, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And it's the best time of year. One of our favorite sporting events, and my personal favorite. And some of the hoops, we'll see over the next few weeks. It doesn't get much better than this. So enjoy it, everyone.
Yeah, I still remember you and I, in the old Daily Collegian offices at Penn State, hunkering down on the Saturdays and Sundays and watching some of those great games in the late 2010s. So that'll do it from us here at Basketball in the Mountains. Like I said, stay tuned for plenty of coverage later in the week. This is going to be an awesome, awesome week and an awesome, awesome tournament. So I hope everybody else enjoys it. I know I will. And so we'll see you next time, everybody.